Hello and happy Thursday, everybody.
Hey, Facebook, thanks for being with us this afternoon. I am actually on my way to Texas to try to spend some time with the pastor that I worked with down there who's now in hospice care. So we are recording this and getting it out to you today. We're grateful that you're with us, joining us for this Bible study. We will also be releasing another one tomorrow, so they will happen on time, but they are pre-recorded. But we're grateful to be able to do that with you, and especially grateful that you join us for them.
Yeah, absolutely. We are finishing up the second part to a Mark and Sandwich story that we began yesterday. If you were for any reason unable to join us yesterday, I highly recommend that you tune into that, because a lot of the elements that were previous in this story are going to really find resolution at the end. This story doesn't make sense without the whole story as a unit. So definitely recommend that you maybe pause this, go back, check that out, come back over here. But that said, we are in Mark chapter 5, and I believe we're going to pick up here at verse 35.
Yeah, and I would agree, Michael, that Mark has done such a good job of weaving these stories together that really it's hard to imagine either one without the other. They really need each other in the way that he's done that. And probably no better example of that than the pivot in the middle here at verse 35. Remember that Jesus has just said to the woman who touched him and was made well, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." And then we move into this story. We pick up the first story again, verse 35. While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house and said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" So let's stop there. You will remember that Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, came to Jesus saying, "My daughter is deathly ill." And on the way there was this encounter with another woman who had been sick for 12 years. And Jesus took time to engage her and hear her story. And it now appears as though that time has cost the daughter her life, that at least to say that there was an urgency and that they will now not get there quickly enough. And it's fascinating that Mark explicitly ties these stories together with the word daughter, making sure we encounter it in verse 34 and in verse 35. And I think, Michael, that commentators have rightly pointed out that it's a very powerful connection.
Yeah, I think I called this yesterday, Clint, one of the greatest sort of transitions in the Gospels, and I think it's true. While he was still speaking, that is a powerful phrase, and it turns the entire story, because we were just yesterday talking about this woman who had this long-standing health issue, who exercised faith. We were talking about what that would mean for her, not just as her own healing, but what it would mean for her socially, what it would mean for her spiritually. And so Jesus is now addressing her. "Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Be healed of your disease." And yet, while he is still speaking, we're suddenly now jolted back into the other story. Oh, wait, we're reminded, this leader, who, once again, he's not called by his name, he's called by his position. This leader has been waiting, most certainly, we imagine, impatiently, while Jesus is having this conversation. And now he hears the words that he has been dreading, and that we now, as a reader, are caught up in ourselves. Oh no, Jesus has exercised the ability to heal this woman, but now what of this other daughter? And Clint, I think in that is another level of a faith story than what you could have gotten without it. The reason that these stories are inseparable is because, on one hand, this woman exercises great faith. Even the Jairus exercises great faith in coming to Jesus in the beginning. But now that his daughter is dead, I think the question is, how much faith can you put into Jesus? Is this the end of the road, or is there a path that opens to a new road? And of course, as readers of Mark, as those who have been engaged in this story, we know that with Jesus, there's always more around the bend than what you first imagine.
Yeah, as human people, they lived with the reality that we have always lived with, that death is final, that everything up to that moment, there may be hope, there may be an option, there may be a miracle, but death is the point at which miracle no longer matters. And Mark is setting that up really powerfully. So verse 36 here, but overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping, wailing loudly. When he entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Let's stop there, Michael. So a common scene in Jesus' day, still a relatively common scene in our day when there is a loss, a community gathers around people. They, in the case of a child, as we can well imagine, they joined them in the sadness of that moment, though a much more common event in Jesus' day, no less a devastating one. And they are wailing, they're weeping, they're grieving, and it's chaotic. And Jesus enters that chaos and makes this crazy statement that the child is not dead but sleeping. And we'll see language like this again in the gospel. But there's no, they know dead. There are doctors there. There are people there. And they laughed at him. And it is interesting that this man who has, in these past few chapters, astounded people, the disciples, who is this that the wind and the waves obey, the man paralyzed, get up and walk, the demoniac who is healed. Jesus has, even just moments before, the woman who is healed of her hemorrhaging, that in this moment, the people laugh at him. They think Jesus is crazy, that there is no hope here. And it is, I think, profound how often hope sounds ridiculous in our most painful moments. We have a hard time recognizing it, and they're not able to see it where they are.
Yeah, it's worth noting that the people who come from the synagogue leader's house say, "Why trouble the teacher any further?" And when Jesus shows up, what good is it for him to see the girl anymore? What good is it to have the teacher enter your home? Synagogue leader, you tried and you failed. But of course, Mark has let us in very early that this isn't the teacher. Jesus isn't just a rabbi. He's not just someone who's coming to sort of illumine people as to God's will. He is God. He brings the authority of God with him. And so we might miss this because we are imagining this commotion and Jesus coming and the people laughing. But note that in the midst of our grief, in the midst of life's most difficult circumstances, we are all in danger of laughing at God, laughing at what God is uniquely able to do. And that's exactly what these people do. They don't just laugh at someone who they think is off his rocker. They laugh at the one who is the Lord, the Savior of the world. And in our moments of greatest need, these are the moments I think that the prayer, "Lord, open my eyes so that I can see you at work," is the most important, because we often miss the power of God when God arrives.
And when Jesus arrives, he does just that. So he put them outside, picking up in the back half of verse 40 here. He put them all outside. He took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. And he took her by the hand, and he said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. And he strictly ordered them that no one should know about this, and told them to give her something to eat. It's always humbling, Michael, when the stories of the gospel include these miracles, as people who have encountered situations where we would have, where miracles have been desperately sought and prayed for and needed. It is this strange moment to read a story like this and to see this wonderful ending where Jesus, in the privacy of this small crowd, calls this girl back to life, saying to her, "Little girl, get up." And she's restored immediately again. Mark loves that word. And she begins to walk about. And so from a gospel perspective, what we see here is another barrier that falls to Jesus. We've seen leprosy, we've seen paralysis, we've seen possession, we've seen hemorrhage. Now we see even death, and we sort of echo what the disciples said a chapter or so ago. Who is this man? I mean, this is a girl who has died, and he brings her to life. He calls her back to life. And we get the curtain pulled back a little farther as Mark shows us more of what it means that Jesus is who he is, the Son of God, the Messiah, and what that means in the world around him.
I don't know if you agree with this, Clint. I think that as those who have grown up with the Christian story, whether you considered yourself Christian your entire life or not, you would be hard-pressed, especially as an American, to make it any distance into life without knowing the basic idea of Christian faith, that Jesus died, that he rose again. Most people understand that sort of Easter story. And I think for people who grow up with it, the idea of resurrection can very easily become passé. The idea that, well, of course we believe that because everyone around us believed it, because our parents believed it, because they taught us it, because there's churches in which that is celebrated every year. But we might miss here, Clint, that in the ancient world, to those receiving this letter, resurrection was also a scandalous idea. I mean, no one thinks of resurrection in the ancient world as being something that happens every day, or that people of power are capable of this kind of act. The fact that this happens, that it's not just the woman with the issue of blood for 12 years, it's the girl whose life is gone in 12 years, who also can find new life, can get up. And Clint, I think that this is setting us up for what is going to be Jesus's reality at the end of this gospel, right? This is not the first time we're going to see resurrection, the dead coming back to life. And yet we might miss, and I think it's worth pausing to say, that this is a really big deal, that we should not miss the significance of this kind of miracle, that this is world shaping to those who receive this letter, that this man, Jesus, had this ability and this power. That's not something that was rampantly believed or thought of in the ancient world.
And I think the true power of this narrative, Michael, comes in those moments that you put the stories in conversation with one another and you begin to see the way in which they complement and interact with one another. So Jairus falls at Jesus' feet and says, "Come lay hands on my daughter," who we now know is 12. And we also know that for the entire time this girl has been alive, this woman has been sick, who comes to Jesus and touches him without laying his hands on her. She touches his cloak and is made well, and then falls at his feet in gratitude and in recognition. He calls her daughter, even as they come to say, "Your daughter," to Jairus, has died. And in the context of the story, it looks like Jesus had to make a choice, right? Which daughter would he choose to save? But ultimately, the power of the story is Jesus doesn't have to pick. Jesus saves both of the daughters. The long-term, older condition, the woman who has been sick for the entire time the child has been alive, and the child whose father is desperately seeking Jesus' help. Jesus saves both of them, calls them both to life, to new life, and the family as well, by laying hands on her and lifting her up. And it's a beautiful, I think, way that Mark has brought these stories together, and the way in which they complement each other is really, I mean, I think this is masterful storytelling.
Yeah, it's among the best. And I also would point out here that this sets into motion real effects in the life and ministry of Jesus. We have this it says in verse 42 that they were overcome with amazement. That's probably one of the greatest understatements of Scripture, that they were overcome with amazement by what had happened. But then you have Jesus moving into what he does in Mark, ordering them, nobody should know about this. Give her something to eat. And then what's going to follow in our conversation tomorrow as we turn into the 6th chapter is that people are wrestling with the question, who is this person? How does a carpenter's son end up doing this and teaching like this and performing miracles like this? This is a moment in which we see that Jesus' authority, which we've seen emphasized and emphasized and emphasized, has now come to a point where he has demonstrated ultimate authority. The ability to raise someone from the dead is the ultimate sign of one's ability to live on the side of creator and not created. And yet, it's that demonstration which is now going to continue to push him forward towards the end of his life and ministry. And that's, I think, maybe where we find some disjunction, is we think of those who are overcome with amazement are going to be the people who celebrate Jesus and who want to follow Jesus. And while that may be true in this particular family, we don't know, Mark doesn't elaborate, we have good reason to know that it's that very same authority that he demonstrates that's going to push him forward as an enemy of those who have power and interest in maintaining that power. And so here we see this amazing sort of sea change beginning to happen.
I don't think, to my knowledge at least, that we hear again from Jairus in the Gospels. It would be fascinating to know where he goes from this as the leader of the synagogue and as one who has literally witnessed Jesus give life to his daughter that he clearly cares about. And it would be a fascinating footnote to know what Jairus does with the gospel in the years and days and months, weeks that follow this event. I have to think that even in the midst of the criticism that will be leveled against Jesus, he will only be able to affirm that Jesus did good, that Jesus did a godly thing, a miraculous thing for him and his family. And I have to imagine that changed his life as well.
Well, friends, thanks for joining us for today's conversation. Like we said, tomorrow we turn to chapter 6. And we get to see what the effects of this very miracle will affect. So we look forward to seeing you then.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining us for this daily Bible study. If this is your first time, welcome. We are so glad that you have joined us for this time of intentional study of God's Word. You will find in the description of this video a link to our website. We would love to get to know who you are. We'd love to reach out and greet you personally, but be sure, whether or not this is your first time, to like this video. If you're on Facebook, share it so that other people might be able to find it too. If you're on YouTube, consider subscribing. You'll receive more content like this every day at 2 o'clock Central Standard Time. On top of that, every Wednesday at 9 o'clock, we release a Pastor Talk podcast, which goes through different series, but all of them about faith and life and discipleship of Jesus Christ. Friends, regardless of how many times you've been with us, we hope that this day has been meaningful for you as you seek to follow Jesus Christ. So until next time, be blessed. We look forward to seeing you soon.